I applaud you for calling attention to the overrepresentation of individuals with serious mental illness in the criminal justice system. It's an issue we've decided to aggressively take on, and I'm proud of the progress we've made. But I talk about this all over the country and the fact that we need to do so much more. We can, I want to repeat, we can turn this thing around. Thanks for being here. The Lord's watching. God bless. Hope to see you soon.
Tragically, our jails and prisons are home to far too many people suffering from mental illness. There are 10 times more people with mental illness in Ohio prisons than in our state's mental health hospitals. The problem's not new, and it's something I first encountered in my days as a Greene County prosecuting attorney. When I served in the U.S. Senate, I co-authored a law to help fund mental health courts, and later a law to provide grants for mentally ill treatment programs in prisons. Today, as Attorney General, my office continues to provide funding to help the mentally ill and to train those who work with them, especially through law enforcement training. And we established a task force with former Supreme Court Justice Eve Stratton that works with courts and the criminal justice system on this issue. It's tough for communities to handle the needs of the mentally ill. It's tough for judges who see very sick people in their courtroom but have no alternative to prison. And it's tough for families who are just trying to help their loved ones. We need to help those suffering get the treatment they need. It's going to take all of us working together.
In the mid-1800s, for the poor and insane, which today we call the mentally ill, there was no place but jails or to wander the streets aimlessly. So they were imprisoned with murderers and other felons and kept from society. They received no treatment for their mental illnesses and living in conditions unfit for any human. Out of this darkness came Dorothea Dix, one of mental health's greatest advocates. So shocked by the wretched and inhumane conditions in which these persons were living, she became their voice. Dorothea Dix made it her life's mission to find a way of providing more humane care to people with mental illness. Due in large part to her efforts, a system of public mental health hospitals was created. As these institutions closed in the 1970s and 80s, public policy dictated that services would be provided in local communities. Yet strains on state budgets became greater, and policymakers were left to make tough choices, and the community support systems envisioned for the mentally ill have not been fully developed. The most severe have fallen through the cracks. Where have they ended up? Back in our nation's jails and prisons. Over 150 years later, history is repeating itself. Once again, we are criminalizing the mentally ill because there is nowhere else for them to go. If Dorothea Dix were here today, she would challenge you to be their voice, their advocate. Make the tough choices and do what is right for those who are unable to speak for themselves. Because for our mentally ill behind bars, it is a matter of life, strife, or death.
What we know is this: we take in 20,000 Ohioans into our prison every year. 20,000 come into our prison. 20% of our population are seriously mentally ill in prison. We're the largest mental health provider in our state, and I think that's probably true around the country in prison systems. Why does someone have to get sent to prison to be able to get these services? Why does someone have to be arrested and go in front of a judge to get these services?
I think we would all agree that there are many people in Ohio and in other states who interact with the law enforcement system, the criminal justice system, in some way, shape, or form because they're struggling with their symptoms and they've not been able to connect with the treatment that's meaningful for them in the community.
I'm bipolar schizoaffective. I've been incarcerated 4 times. I come from a family of 13. I'm the third oldest, the oldest girl. My mother died of cancer when I was 11. I'm the only one that's ever been in trouble. We all finished high school and college. And I used to tutor math, like in elementary schools. And when I was in college at Kent State, because that's where I graduated, I began to steal. It started off very minute, and then it progressively went into larger things. I became comfortable with it. I feel a lot of shame and guilt. I wasted a lot of time being in prison where I could have probably been, expanding to another level or something else, because I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I feel mentally drained as well as feel physical.
It's a shame that people often have to go to prison to receive mental health or drug addiction training or programming and build up this large stack of collateral consequences along the way, which in some cases is a life sentence. And if you don't believe it, talk to folks about how hard it is to get a job after they're released.
Because most people stigmatize most people do the interview of you just to know why you were in jail, not because they're going to hire you.
If I were to say, that person takes medicine, they're mentally ill, everyone's going to run the other direction. It's the same thing here in this prison.
The stigma involved is the biggest challenge for me. When you're in prison, there's a stigma too when you go into rec, when you're on the yard, they always look at you like 1 day, 1 second you're gonna flip out, like you can't be in the same capacity as they're in. Having a stigma makes you ashamed of your mental illness, makes you ashamed and you don't want to take your meds. You just want to be in a daily routine with the rest of them.
We have a little tiny society that belongs just to ourselves. But the whole society in this prison looks at us, as like lepers.
Mental illness is not a casserole illness. Nobody brings you casseroles, nobody brings you food, nobody sends you balloons and get well cards, and none of that happens for people who have a mental illness, and none of that happens for the family. If anything, people disappear.
At some point, when I come full circle with myself, I would like to help other women that has been the road, tell them about my life, how I made this, how the recidivism, it never got any better, it just kept on expanding.
It really becomes important that whether it be drug offenders with medication-assisted treatment or the mentally ill offenders, that we have continuity of care. And what can't happen is this. We can't stop treatment to allow a new assessment. And that's been going on in this state and around the country. Our folks have been released from prison, and the next service provider gets paid for another assessment. So an assessment takes place, and during that assessment, programming and treatment stops. We've got to stop that. In my 40 years, I've seen many inmates that were seriously mentally ill, drifted away from their medication, drifted away from their treatment, and became violent inside prisons. That same thing happens in the community.
My diagnosis is bipolar. Back then it was schizophrenic with psychosis or whatever, but now it's bipolar. My first experience with being incarcerated, I feel like I was just roaming around the prison doing my time, letting time pass. And then one day I had a psychotic episode and no one could help me. And they sent me to all these Oakwood places. They sent me back here a lot to the R3. They sent me to the hole. Then I went back home after being in prison, and everybody thought I was crazy because they just heard about them trying to, I guess, help me. So everybody thought I was crazy. I didn't know how to handle it. So I guess I lashed out. No one fully informed me about anything, about going out there with a mental illness, about going out by leaving prison anyway after doing 8 years. No one fully informed me of anything, I feel like. So I was just like out there on my own, with my own knowledge, with my own everything. And I don't think I didn't handle it well.
When those folks have left, during most of my 40 years, almost all of my 40 years, those folks left that kind of setting, went into a community with nothing. In fact, the day I came back as director, we were giving the mentally ill inmates 14 days of psychotropic medication. You know how long it takes for a person to get an appointment to see a psychiatrist? It was 3 months.
If I would have better treatment, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But again, too, if I would have accepted my mental illness, if someone could have explained it to me a little better while I was here, instead of just letting me go off into a psychotic episode and just writing stuff, instead of explaining it to me, then I might not be sitting back here.
Now, we've expanded the length of medication, the time frame, and that helps, but what needs to happen is this. And what is happening is this. Through Medicaid and our Office of Medicaid in Ohio, we have a case manager coming in from Medicaid, meeting with the seriously mentally ill, identifying where they're going to go, matching them up with service providers in the community that will be, where they will be returned, ideally getting that service provider in before they leave, setting up an appointment after they leave, and so the same kind of services that were delivered can be continued in the community, and that service provider actually meet with the inmate before they leave. We ought to be trying to engage earlier in lives before people build these collateral consequences that are life sentences.
Matt was diagnosed at around 30 years old. He went homeless and left the house, did not know where he was for almost 2 years. Every night, when I put my head on my pillow to go to sleep, I thought, where is he laying his head tonight? He was on the streets, and he didn't do drugs or he didn't drink, but he would get arrested for loitering. Arrested, booked, processed, put in with criminals, had fights while he was in there, and then put back on the street in the winter, in the cold. He got frostbite, and so bad that it turned into lesions, and he was arrested again. When he was arrested, there was no notification of family. We didn't even know it. It took a friend of mine that I grew up with, who happened to just be there by chance, the prosecutor who was going to prosecute Matt, to call me and say, your son just came in with frostbite, he's almost dead, and he's going to lose his legs. He's got lesions all over his legs. Is this your son? And we talked to the lieutenant at the police station and the officers there. Oh yes, we know Matt. He's a really nice kid. But they've arrested him 9 times. They released him into my care. Refused to take his medication. Started getting worse and worse and worse again. And then one day he told us he was going out to California. Left. Went out to California. And that's where he passed away at 33 years old. They arrest these people, put them in with the criminals, and then they put them back out on the streets. You would think that there could be something put together where they're divided from the criminals and taken to a place where they can get medication and get treatment, because they're not criminals. These people are mentally ill, and the public has got to start recognizing that and get rid of the stigma that is associated with these kids.
So am I supposed to go to the legislature and say I'm going to build prisons because they've got more nonviolent, drug-addicted, mentally ill folks coming? No, I'm not doing that. And I am not going to build a prison. And there's folks in this state that are lobbying me that cannot understand why I'm not building another prison. You realize the taxpayers of this state, to build one prison, 2,000 beds, one prison, to build one prison, operate it for 2 decades is $1 billion. Now, I'm not going to leave that legacy to the state. I believe our investment ought to be in people, not brick and mortar. And as long as I'm director, that's the way it's going to be. We have mentally ill folks that have committed serious offenses that, quite frankly, Ohioans should be afraid of because they are very dangerous. Prison is the right place for them, and that's why it's so important that we have prison. It's also so important that we provide mental health programming in prison. Evidence-based programs delivered in a community setting are twice as effective as those done in prison, twice as effective, at about 1/3 of the cost. The folks that should go to prison are the folks that we're afraid of. The folks that we're mad at ought to be treated in a community, in effective community-based programs.
There was no talking about mental illness in my family. It was obsolete. I never even heard of mental illness except someone's crazy. The one thing I feel like can help me to be my most successful self is to get my other family members, the other support people, get them a reentry program so they can better deal with me coming out and being different now that I'm institutionalized.
We have dollars that we've been investing in these past 2 years in partnership with the ADAM boards and with county jails and sheriffs to help create more of a treatment opportunity inside of the county jails for people who may have mental health diagnoses and previously who didn't have access to treatment. This could also include some linkage services for them as they're preparing to go back to their communities as well.
I got schizoaffective, bipolar, and there must be another one. I can't remember that. I can't remember how many days I've been in jail, but I've been in prison for 16 years, I know that. I got released and then I got sent back. Again. I can't remember what it was though. I was depressed all the time. It was just a terrible time over there. I'm doing much better since, I came out. A lot better. I was a hellion back then, but now I'm really good right now. I'm changing my life and everything. I'm actually a new person right now. I'm getting mental health and I'm getting counseling at Matco. I can get better treatment out here than I can in there, to be honest with you. I don't know what my future's gonna be like right now. Probably real good, probably. I do have a good support group and a good work site group. They're all supportive of me, and I really appreciate that, and I really love them with all my heart. And I really appreciate that.
I think having that support and that support group, or having someone that'll just listen to you and be empathetic and understanding, is probably the one thing that keeps people from totally being in despair.
And it's time for society to accept the fact that this is a disease just like anything else. It's a disease just like cancer. It's a disease that needs to be treated, even though it is not as sexy to support.
I don't want no one to feel sorry for me, but know the need that one needs in mental health because they're different. They don't make us bad people.
Well, just accept me for who I am. If this is who I am, then I gotta accept it too. So maybe we can partner up and do it together. Accept me, I accept you, and then everybody do their part on helping.